Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Duke Wisdom Podcast. I'm trying to get back to these Tuesday, Thursday drops, but I think with how the transfer portal, how fluid the transfer portal and NBA draft declarations are, I'm kind of playing it by ear a little bit because, some Tuesday mornings it might be, well, there's not really a whole lot of news to talk about. And that's the case. That was the case this morning, and I'm really glad that I didn't record last night now. Because as fate would have it, here in the middle of the day, we get some big news. And I've had some people talk to me. I've had some people talking to me about, how much I like Mark Mitchell. People like fighting me on how much I like Mark Mitchell. Well, congratulations to all of you want Mark Mitchell's off the team crew. He entered the transfer portal this afternoon. Much to my protest, perhaps. I thought that Mark Mitchell was a very, very good, very great player. I just had a whole lengthy argument on Twitter about why he was a great player. And I'll kind of get into that. I think, first of all, Mark Mitchell is going to be missed because Brendan Mark said, he had a tweet where he said he was just one of those great locker room guys. Smile that can light up a room. Just a great dude, such a great dude to have on the team, and such a talented player, right? I mean, you're gonna miss a guy like that no matter what, and you gotta. If you're a Duke fan, you gotta have a little bit of empathy when any player leaves. Better yet, a 2-year starter who is a McDonald's All-American, averaging double digits. I mean, we've never seen a player like that transfer from Duke. Plain and simple, I think that Mark Mitchell has a case to be Duke's greatest transfer ever out of the program, that is, in terms of how good was he before he entered the portal. Like, I'm not saying he's going to outplay Shimi Ojale or Bill McCaffrey later, but I think his first 2 years, his first 2 years, was the best career of any player Duke's ever had enter the transfer portal. I mean, you can come up with some names to confront me on that, but I think it's true. I think Mitchell was, really the stiffest competition he has was McCaffrey, who put up the exact same 11.6 scoring average before he transferred. Now, McCaffrey played a role on a better Duke team than Mitchell did. That is for certain. However, Mitchell played a big role and started nearly every single game of his 2-year career at Duke. Had he played a third year, he would have been a 1,000-point scorer. There's almost no doubt about that either. It seemed like, and I've talked a lot about this subject of Mark Mitchell transferring, and I think I was in denial for a long time. And over the last couple of weeks, especially during the NCAA tournament, I wanted him to come back because I believed the best version of Duke involved a improved Mark Mitchell at the 3. And I honestly still believe that. And I think a lot of people will fight me on that belief because they don't think Mitchell fits the system. I think I was in a bit of denial for a while, but now that I've seen kind of the decreased minutes Shire had for him in the tournament, and just kind of the way he played looked like he was a bit disconnected from the system. I think the way John Shire imagined last year's team didn't work with Mark Mitchell at the 4. I think the way he's imagined next year's team wouldn't work with Mark Mitchell at the 4, which is why I kind of liked the idea of him at the 3. But I will say the idea of Mark Mitchell playing the 3 next year would only have really worked if Jared McCain returns for a sophomore season, which I think is highly unlikely. So if Jared McCain doesn't come back, like I assume he probably won't, given his draft stock, he might. He might. Honestly, he might. It's not out of the question at all. But assuming McCain's in the draft, in that scenario, you're starting Foster. And I'll talk more about Tyrese Proctor in a minute, but let's say he comes back. Tyrese Proctor, Caleb Foster, and then you're looking at, Flag and Malawach in the front court. If Mitchell had come back and he was slotted at the 3 or the 4 there, I don't think it works. And the reason I don't think it works is because there's not enough shooting there. Like, Malawach can shoot the ball, but he's not a crazy threat. He's not making defenses pray that he's going to miss when he's open. Same thing with Cooper Flagg. He's got shot-making capabilities, but there are question marks about his three-point shooting. Tyrese Proctor's been a pretty inconsistent three-point shooter, and I don't think that it's any stretch of the imagination to call him easily the best three-point shooter of those five players. So because of Mitchell's struggles as a shooter, and I think the way it wouldn't have been a perfect fit. I think in a lot of ways, assuming McCain's gone, it might be for Mark Mitchell's benefit that he goes elsewhere, and it might be for Duke's benefit potentially that he goes elsewhere, depending on who Duke gets to play that three. And I think maybe one of the reasons I've been really hesitant, I love Isaiah Evans. I love that guy. His moxie, his cockiness, his trolling, man, I love that guy. And his ability to fill it up as an offensive player is extremely impressive. It's extremely impressive. But for me, it was there's so many questions about him defensively. So many questions about him defensively. Now you can say, well, they're picking up the slack because Malawach on paper, great defender. Flagg's a fantastic defender. Tyrese Proctor has shown flashes of being one of the best perimeter defenders in the country at times. That's what he can be. I think Caleb Foster has the potential to be a solid defender. And so it was like, well, here's kind of your weak point. If Mark Mitchell was back, that wouldn't be a weak point. Defensively, that would be an absolute unit. That front court would have been almost impenetrable defensively with Mark Mitchell there. Now, obviously, that's not really something we can consider now. I think that no matter what happens, the three spot will probably be a pretty weak spot defensively for Duke, unless they come in and they bring in a transfer who's some sort of defensive specialist. I think that could change the dynamic for Duke. They have reached out to forward/center Amari Williams from Drexel. Now, I do think if they bag Amari Williams, it's possible that he starts. It's possible. Like if they got a guy like that who's a multiple-time defensive player of the year in his conference, that would be an imposing defensive unit for Duke. Just an absolutely remarkably imposing defensive unit if they got a player like Amari Williams. I'm not saying it'd be Amari Williams specifically, but a guy like that. Play him at the 4 with Malawach at the 5, and you run Cooper Flagg at the 3 because he very much can play the 3 or the 4. And that works, I think. But you've got to have a really good backcourt as well to make that work because, again, you're compromising shooting with a player like that, most likely, just like you would be with Mark Mitchell. I think Mark Mitchell gets some unfair rap from people, from fans, Duke fans especially. I think this season, I don't know if I've ever seen a Duke team get more in-house hate than this past year's team. I think the rhetoric around the team and the way people talked about this year's team, you would have thought they missed the tournament. Honestly, you would have thought that they missed the NCAA tournament. The way that they were talked about sometimes by some people, not everybody. But the way some people talk about him, you would think that wasn't a team that just was a 4 seed that went to the Elite Eight, which is overachieving, might I add. And no, they did not overachieve to their preseason expectations. Duke literally almost never overachieves its preseason expectations because the day after the national championship, Vegas has Duke as the national championship favorite literally almost every year, no matter what the roster is going to look like, no matter how young it is, no matter how good it really actually is. Duke's just always there. They're always there. They're always the most, present factor in college basketball. And you think college basketball, you think Duke, and that's a testament to the brand, but it's a little detrimental when it comes to expectations preseason. They're a little lofty and they're a little unreasonable every single season. And so, yeah, this Duke team fell short of those expectations. How many Duke teams in recent memory haven't fell short of their preseason expectations? I mean, honestly, how many? 2022? And at that point, people are still disappointed because they lost to an inferior Carolina team. And 2015 didn't fall short of those expectations. 2010 didn't. It's like almost they have to win a national title, or at the very least, they have to make it to the Final Four if they weren't a preseason top 5 team to meet expectations. Honestly, from the moment this Duke team lost its second game of the season to Arizona, it put itself in a place where it was really no longer a team that people considered a favorite to go to the Final Four anymore. It was pretty clear pretty early this wasn't a team that was favorited to go to the Final Four. And yet they were one game away from doing it. I think they did well for the cards they were dealt, for the injuries they were dealing with, for the lack of a great front court structure for this team, I think they did well. And I think the players especially get a very unfair amount of flack. Kyle Filipowski did, and I've talked many times about the perception of him, and I'm seeing it now with Mark Mitchell, the people saying that he isn't good. He wasn't good. Good riddance. And I'm like, come on, man. I mean, this dude was the leading scorer in his McDonald's All-American game. He had 19 points in that game. He was truly great. He was. In terms of a college basketball player, Mark Mitchell is inarguably a top 5% player in Division I basketball. Arguably a top 1 or 2 or 3% player in all of college basketball. He is automatically one of the most coveted players in the portal. And that's kind of an argument I want to dial in here, because I see this sentiment so much that's like Duke needs to utilize the portal. They got to utilize the portal. The portal's where it's at. You got to get these veteran players out of the portal, right? And it's like, because these players are so good, they're ready to win. And it's almost like, well, all those these players that you're looking at in the portal that you think are these game changers, these season-changing type talents that you see, these veterans, they're all worse than most of them, not all of them, but the great majority of them are worse than Mark Mitchell. Straight up, they are. As a player, I think Mark Mitchell is automatically now one of the top handful of players in the portal, easily, without a doubt. I think that is the case. He is so much better than some of these players that fan bases will be like, oh, we got to get this guy in the portal. We got to get this guy. Mark Mitchell's better than them. And I've always erred on the side that why not develop in-house? Why not develop a player in-house and it'll work out, because Duke gets the most talented players out of high school. And I think the tendency is to complain that it's not working because they're 19 years old and those portal players that you see are 22, 23, 29, 48 in Cormac Ryan's case. That's unfair. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating to be in the position that Duke is in the transfer portal right now, because, yeah, you're landing the best players, but they're not as well developed as these older players on other teams. UConn just won with two players who are two players in its backcourt who are fifth-year players who came from small programs to start their career. And I like the idea of keeping around these McDonald's All-Americans until they're juniors or seniors. It's not foolproof. They're not perfect players by that point. But I liked the idea of having another 1,000-point scorer, a veteran who's been there the whole time. I love that graphic. That is all 5 starters for Duke started their career at Duke, and they were the only Elite 8 team that could say that. I love that. I love that. I loved that no one entered the portal or really came in outside of Neal last season. I like that, keeping it in-house kind of mentality. I wasn't surprised that Reeves transferred. I won't be surprised that 1 or 2 other bench players might as well. I'm not shocked that Mitchell has now, and I want to stress something. While I think that Mark Mitchell is a great player and that he is drastically undervalued as a player by Duke fans and some other fans alike, I believe he is so much better than people make him out to be. I will say that I also recognize that he obviously did not fit in well with the scheme of John Shire this season especially, and wouldn't for next season either. I acknowledge why he transferred, because the fit just isn't quite there. That is, to me, the biggest reason for Mark Mitchell to have entered the portal, because the fit's just not there. His game isn't fitting this. There's obviously some disconnect. His minutes were going down. There were times where you could see kind of a frustration there, and so it's not surprising, and it could even be for the better of both parties, I think. I don't doubt that at all. But it's still upsetting to lose a player who I think is this good. And here's the main point I want to drive home. I think there's some sentiment that Mitchell's entering the portal because the front court's just too crowded. You got Kaman, you got Cooper, you got Sean. They might go after someone in the portal. There's just Patrick's coming in. There's just not enough space for Mark Mitchell to exist. And that's the point I want to just knock down I want to chop that tree down right now. That's not the case. Mark Mitchell is a 2-year starter, former McDonald's All-American, double-digit point scorer, played consistently until the last few games of the season there, minutes-wise. Mark Mitchell wasn't going to be hurting for minutes. If Mark Mitchell came back, the players that would be hurting for minutes would be Sean and Patrick and any transfer they bring in. Mark Mitchell would have started, without a doubt. Whether you believe me or not, he would have. If he'd come back to Duke, he'd be in the starting lineup. That's just how it is. As a 2-year starter that's that good, you don't just lose your spot. He had that spot. That was his. And he would have worked. He would have been a better player next season. I have no doubt. He was a better player this season than he was as a freshman, contrary to beliefs. I mean, he started this season shooting 4% from three. He ended it shooting 27.5%. 27.5% from three is not great, but it's a whole lot better than 4. He really salvaged that, and he did a good job of it, of not being scared of the moment. There were moments. So let me just kind of close that point that, it wasn't because everything became too crowded for Mark Mitchell to exist. If Mark Mitchell persisted in the Duke rotation, it might have been too crowded for some of the other guys, not for him. I firmly believe that. But I want to push back majorly on the negative discourse about Mitchell. You don't get to be a 2-year starter in your first 2 years at Duke and have a plethora of 20-plus point games in the middle of your sophomore season without being a great player. That's just how it is, man. That's the bar is a little too high at Duke sometimes. That people will say that players suck, that they're not good, because they're not Zion Williamson, because they're not Marvin Bagley. No one is Zion Williamson or Marvin Bagley. They are some of the greatest Duke basketball players of all time, and they only played 1 season, man. If you're holding them to that bar, that's crazy. You cannot hold anyone to that bar. Anyone to that bar. You can't even hold Cooper Flagg to that bar, man. That bar is in outer space if that's the bar you're holding people to at Duke. I mean, come on. I know Duke's bar is higher than everybody else, and that's for a good reason. Because they are the paramount of college basketball. They're the peak of college basketball, so their bar should be higher than every other's teams for talent and player performance. However, the bar can't be set by the best player. The bar is set by, I think, a good Duke player sets the bar, right? Like a solid Duke player sets the bar. And a solid Duke player is like Ryan Kelly, not Zion Williamson. So don't be like, Mark Mitchell was a failure during his time at Duke because he wasn't racking in the awards. That's unfair. And I also think he got snubbed for the all-defensive team as a freshman and should have been given some, and the all-freshman team. All-freshman and all-defensive team his freshman year. He should have been given more consideration than he was. And I firmly believe that.
Want to join a community of Duke accounts publishing news, theories, and predictions on Duke athletics? Join the Duke Wisdom Network. Just go to dukewisdom.org/join network today and fill out the form with your name and social media. Or you can DM at Duke_wisdom on Twitter or Instagram. Become a part of the community of Duke fans publishing their takes today. Again, that's dukewisdom.org/join network. Or DM at Duke_wisdom on Twitter or Instagram.
If I haven't lost you, if you're one of the people who really don't believe that Mark Mitchell was necessary, that he was a great player, and I've lost you during my argument here, I'm sorry. I really am. I don't want to alienate people who think that Mitchell needed to go or Duke's better off without him. I think there's merit to the argument that Duke might be a better team without Mark Mitchell. It depends on who else they can retain or bring in from the portal, ultimately, to whether they'll be a better team or not. Obviously, losing a player like that hurts. And saying that it doesn't hurt it's wrong, right? It's wrong. Duke has never lost a player this good or this important to their scheme, this important to what they did the season prior. And so this is new territory for Duke in the portal, because even in the portal era, the players that Duke has lost have been like Jordan Tucker, Alex O'Connell, Jordan Goldwire, Henry Coleman, Jamin Brakefield, Joey Baker, good players in terms of being a college basketball player. Mark Mitchell is a lot better than all of them. Considerably better than all of those players. When you think about what Michael Benajay and Shimi Ojale were able to do when they left Duke, I think that Mark Mitchell can do that times two wherever he decides to go. I'm interested to see where he goes. I've heard, USC could be a possibility, and I think that certainly rings true because of some familial ties, and also because Eric Musselman moving over to USC is big, because I think the style of basketball that Arkansas played would benefit Mark Mitchell. And so USC feels like a real possibility. I think Baylor feels like a real possibility as long as Scott Drew doesn't jump ship from Baylor to Kentucky, which I also think is a legitimate possibility as well. And so I'll kind of wrap the talk about Mark Mitchell in a way that's like, thank you for your 2 years. Duke faithful loves you, and good luck wherever you go. And I hope we don't have to play you. So moving on from kind of that Mark Mitchell talk, I'm gonna be working on an article for the North Carolina Sports Network. Be on the lookout for this. I'll post it on Twitter and everything when it comes out. But be on the lookout for that. I'm going to be talking about the scholarship availability, who's coming and going, that kind of thing. Who probably has to leave, will leave, might not leave, that kind of thing, and balancing that with the freshman scholarships coming in. If I'm Duke right now, I think there's big fat question marks on a few guys. There's one guy in particular, especially. I think Foster to a lesser degree also applies for this, but there's one guy who, if you're John Shire, he is your top priority. Forget the transfer portal. Forget everything else. There's one man that you have to recruit to be in Durham next year, and that's Tyrese Proctor. Everything else falls after that. Number one priority, get Tyrese Proctor back. I firmly believe Duke cannot win the national championship if Tyrese Proctor enters the transfer portal or the NBA draft and does not return to Duke next season. If Tyrese Proctor is not playing at Duke University next season, and you can cite me on this. Like, you can come back, you can screen record this clip, post it or whatever. If I end up being wrong, please do, because I hope I'm wrong. But I firmly believe no Tyrese Proctor, no national championship, no chance. If Duke doesn't have Tyrese Proctor next year, there is not a single chance that they are winning the national championship. You have to have some sort of veteran continuity on the roster, some form of veteran continuity in order to win a national title. You can look at UConn and tell me that, yeah, Stephon Castle was a freshman, that Tristan Newton, Cam Spencer were transfers. Transfers, yeah, but Newton wasn't in his first year at Connecticut. And also, Caravan was in his second year, Klingon in his second year. There was some consistency in the roster. The consistency for Duke's roster next year cannot be 2 or 3 of the freshmen. It can't just be like, oh, well, we got Foster and Stewart, or we got Foster, Stewart, and Power back. That's good. And then we got this talented freshman crew. We got a couple of transfers who might as well be freshmen, but just older in terms of like making things mesh. Because you can even say, like, and they have to be important players coming back for continuity, really important players on the team. You can look at Carolina and say, well, they just had so many transfers come in and contribute, plus Cadeau, and look what they did. Yeah, but they had RJ Davis and Armando Bacot back. Yeah, they lost most of their team from the year prior, but like they had Washington and Trimble coming in and contributing off the bench. And to a much higher degree, they had Davis and Bacot back. That's another reason I wanted Mitchell back, because I felt that he and Proctor could be that 1-2, juniors returning punch. You don't have Mitchell. That's kind of out of the cards. And I almost feel like everybody's out of the cards in terms of like starters, except Proctor. This offseason to me is a failure if Tyrese Proctor does not return to Duke. It makes everything else so much more difficult. So priority 1, get Tyrese Proctor back. And then you can look to fill out the team with who else can we get to return? And can we get lucky on like a McCain or a Roach is the next box you have to kind of look at. And I don't know that that's going to happen, but you never know. And then you got to look at filling out the existing gaps in the roster with the portal. But priority 1, go get Tyrese Proctor back. Last couple things to talk about in this episode. I'll talk more about, individual decisions as they come in. I think it's easier to talk about them as they come in than speculate about them beforehand necessarily. Let's talk about preseason rankings. I posted a poll on Twitter that was like, do you want Duke to be ranked first? And it was like, yes, no, or don't care. And I think the no's are carrying with don't care pretty much almost tied. And for me, it's like, I do care about the preseason ranking because I don't want Duke to be one. Like, firmly, the number one team preseason, you don't want the expectations of that, especially when your team is driven by 17 and 18-year-olds. You do not want that to be the narrative preseason. You don't want to be the favorite. I think it is in Duke's best interest to be ranked highly, but not too highly. I'd like a 4 or a 4th or 5th. I think the 2015 team was 4th preseason. That's like setting the bar that's like, we're giving this team respect. We respect this team. We expect good things out of it. This is a team we see that could be a 1 seed, but we're not like, this is the favorite to win the national title. Don't ever want that expectation. So I think preseason rankings mean very, very, very little, but I think there is weight to being the preseason number 1 team that you don't want. And so that's where the meaning in the preseason rankings is, to me, is avoiding the misplaced significance that people put in it. That's where any piece of value lays in preseason rankings. So I just kind of wanted to talk about that. And then I also want to talk about the fact that I keep seeing these way too earlies, right? And why are we making way too early top 25s in the transfer portal era? Like, what's going on with that? Because, we don't know who's going to be on like any of these rosters. For Duke, we know 6 freshmen are going to be on that team and probably Sean Stewart. But outside of that, it's like we don't really know anything else. And so I think that's a really interesting dynamic. So why are we looking at all these teams talking about this is, they should be ranked here, they should be ranked here, they should be ranked here, when we don't even know who's returning to those rosters? So I think the way too early top 25s always are meaningless, but are especially meaningless in the transfer portal era. My final point of the episode before I wrap this one up is to talk about another transfer portal topic. Well, obviously, the huge news that John Calipari's leaving Kentucky and heading to Arkansas has Duke ramifications, because one of Duke's first games of the season will be in the Champions Classic against the Wildcats. And so when you look at that, you see, well, Carter Knox is already decommitted. They've already had transfer portal entries, that kind of thing. Kentucky's roster might get kind of torn apart a bit. And not only is Kentucky's roster getting torn apart because Calipari's departure, I mean, I don't know anything about Tommy Lloyd, but already Arizona's roster has kind of fallen to the wayside, it seems, with Omar Ballo entering the transfer portal. Let me tell you, knock on wood, I hope Carolina does not get Omar Ballo. Omar Ballo would be pretty much like the perfect 1-for-1 Armando Bacot replacement. Not 1-for-1, but like as close to as they could get to fitting that exact role and doing it at a high level. So if you're a Duke fan, be rooting very hard for Ballo not to land at UNC. But Ballo's in the portal with some other contributing players at Arizona. And to me, it's like, well, those were Duke's 2 biggest games in non-conference play for next season. Kentucky and Arizona, those are supposed to be these huge, massive wins, if they can get them, that will help them in the long road trying to get a 1 seed next season. Well, if both of those teams aren't what we thought they were going to be, Duke might have a pretty bad non-conference slate again. And it's not even because they didn't try to schedule it tough. It's just bad luck. And I mean, who would think that Kentucky and Arizona's rosters might fall apart? Well, it looks like there's a possibility. And so I think that's tough if it ends up going that way and Duke doesn't get, even if they get wins, they're not big wins. That would suck. That would put Duke's back against the wall to have an amazing ACC slate to get a 1 seed. So that's tough. And that's just I kind of wanted to mention that, because that is something to think about when we're thinking about how good can next year's team be, because I believe fully that getting a 1 seed is almost a necessary device to winning a national championship when you think about the fact that since, I don't even know what year, since at least for the last 15, 20 years almost. It's like the only national champions that weren't 1 seeds were all UConn teams, or that 1 year that Villanova did it is a 2 seed. So if you're not UConn, or in the Big East at least, winning a national championship as a non-1 seed just doesn't really happen for you. So Duke needs that 1 seed, and non-conference big wins are a huge part of that, unfortunately. And for Duke, those wins are looking like they might not be quite what they wanted them to be, if they are even wins, right? So that's something to monitor. The portal's going crazy. There are so many decisions left to be made for Duke basketball in the coming days, the coming weeks. Two of the 11 players that need to make a decision have done so. There are 9 left. So still so much to talk about here in the months of April and May. If you're a Mark Mitchell hater, I'm sorry. And I doubt you made it this long in the podcast. I won't be talking a whole lot about Mark Mitchell's return anymore, given the recent news. So you'll be free from that. And please make sure to tune into the next episode. I appreciate everybody who listens. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast, follow wherever, follow on Instagram and Twitter. And I'll talk to you guys later.